Hi everybody, it's Grandad here again. And what am I up to today? Well, today I'm going to have a little look at through some of the things I've collected over the years. And one of the things that sort of interested me, and I try to pick them up if I see some in an antique shop or charity shop, or even if I'm just out and about at the coast, I like to pick up seashells. Now, seashells are quite a fascinating subject. And you can get books on it. I managed to pick up this little book, the Observer book from a charity shop, and you can pick these up quite cheaply. This was 50p, I think it cost me. I mean, it was only £3 when it was new, but it was only 50p in a charity shop, and it helps the charity to buy something. So I like this little book. And as you go through this little book, it shows you all sorts of seashells. Now, it's fascinating what you can find that comes out of the sea. And seashells are one of the things that's very easy to collect. It makes an interesting subject. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands, of different kinds of seashells and things that come out of the sea. Now, I've got a few here, which I'll go through. I got actually 3 boxes of different kinds of seashells. And what I'll do, I mean, I haven't looked at these seashells for quite some time, and they've been up in my attic, and I thought I'd do a video about them because, as I say, they're so interesting. Now, I don't know whether I can use this book. Some of the shells are in this book that I've got, and so I might be able to identify the actual names of them. But when you're out and about at the seaside, you're pretty much bound to pick up seashells. I mean, I've got one here, which is what they call a razor shell. Now, this one is a long shell, and when you find them together, usually you find just one, but they actually live in the ground or in the sea or in the sand, and there's 2 shells joined together. This one's still joined together, and it's got some of its outside bits and pieces on it, and they actually sit in the sand upright like that. And they come out from the top here, and they'll go up to the surface of the sand and feed on little feelers will come out, and the creature would feed on material that's floating around in the sea. And when the tide goes out, it retreats down into the sand, and so it's hidden. Now, obviously, when they die, you find them, and they're usually in one piece like that. And they call them razor shells because back in the day, people used to shave with an open razor. And they look very much like, when you put 2 together, they look very much like the old razor that they used to shave with. And so they call them razor shells. And those are very easily found on the beach. So I know myself what that one's called. Now, there are lots of other shells, of which I'm not too sure of the name of. Now, this one is sort of interesting because as you know me, I like to fiddle about with things. And this shell, I can't exactly remember how it all goes back together now, but this shell I've sliced and diced this one. If I turn the camera down onto the table, you might be able to see. What I've done is got this shell, and I've done several of these, and what I've done, I've cut it in half, cut it into slices. So this shell, or it used to, all go together. I can't quite put it together now, but it all went together. And there's several slices of it, which I cut through and sliced this shell up so I could see the internal structure. It's quite interesting. When you cut them through, they make quite interesting shapes. And this one's actually been painted with silver paint. Somebody used it as a decoration or something. And so that's been cut through. And there's another one here I've got, which is, I think that's another part of that big one. And it's quite interesting if you put it all together. Now, this one is another one, which I've cut through. I don't know if I can find the other half of it. There it was. So it looked like that to start with. And I've cut it in half, just to see the internal structure of it. And again, it looks very interesting when cut through inside. Now, there's lots of shells that are like that, and I've got a whole box full of shells I've collected, and sometimes you find them conical shaped, and if you look in this book you can actually find the names of these shells. And there's another funny shaped shell there, which is a strange shape. Now these are found, and there's some like snails. They probably work some kind of water snail or mollusks. Some are oysters. You get oyster shells. But all these shells have got different names. And if you look in this book, you can find the different names of them. Clam shells and bivalves, gastropods, and whelks, dog whelks, and snakeskin top shell, they call that one. And so you can find out the names of these shells, and there's some very interesting ones. Now I've got some more here in these boxes. In fact, I got the daddy of them all here, which is a huge shell. And I think they call these conchs. And on the tropical islands, they gather these conchs and they knock a hole in the bottom here, and they blow through them, and they can send messages by making it into a horn. And it's quite famous that they do woohoo, call out using one of these huge conch shells. Now apparently they don't like you taking these conch shells anymore because obviously tourists pick them up. But they're restricted now, and you're not allowed to buy them anymore, I don't think, these huge conch shells. So I'm quite lucky that I managed to pick this one up at a market somewhere. And I've got hold of this very... incidentally, they reckon if you listen to the conch shell, you can hear the sea. And you can hear a noise, but I don't know whether it's the sea or not. But this certainly makes an echo inside there. And it's quite an interesting shell, and I managed to pick this up at a market. So I've got a conch shell. Now, they come in all sorts of sizes. This is quite a large snaily type shell, I suppose you'd call it. And that's quite interesting. And if you go to the seaside, you very often find a shell shop where they sell shells similar to this. And some of them are quite beautiful. I mean, I've got one here, which I'm not sure of the exact name of it. But it's, I can surely find it in that book, but I won't waste time while I search through a book for the name. But you can find out the name of that shell, and I don't know what it is, but it's really pretty, and sometimes they carve these. I've actually got one, which I forgot about, up on the shelf here, because people carve them, and that one has been carved. It's one of these shells, because you can see the spots on the bottom of it. But somebody has very cleverly carved this shell, and produced quite a nice little creature of it, a little Aquarius sign they've carved into that. Now it's quite pretty, and I thought it was very clever how they carved the shell to show that, and so I bought it. Now, as I say, they're trying to stop people buying these shells, because if you find the shell on the beach, it's usually broken and not in very good condition. So people would go in these foreign countries, they'd go and they'd collect these shells from the sea when they're live. I mean, maybe some of them they could eat, I don't know, so maybe that's all right. But they gather them live and kill the creature inside. And so because they don't want people doing that, killing the creatures, they sort of outlawed it a little bit. And I have actually got somewhere, I can't find it now, but I didn't find it when I wanted to make the video. But I've actually got resin. They make these resin blocks, like glass-like resin, and they put a creature inside. Now somewhere I've got one with a seahorse in it, and seahorses are very rare. So it's a pity that they actually caught a seahorse and put it in this resin and sold it as a souvenir. And I've also somewhere got a crab, which again, while I was making this video, I couldn't just find it, but that's done as well. And you pick them up occasionally. As I say, I'm not very keen on people going and killing the animals to put them in resin or to sell them as souvenirs. But it's been done in the past. So if you go to an antique market and you see one, maybe it's worth buying for a collection. But I don't advocate that people use real animals in that way. Now I've got another creature here, another shell, which again I picked up from a market. And this is a huge seashell, and it actually locks together. So it shows how this creature lived in its life on the bottom of the sea. And it would open to feed, and then close again. So you've got two shells there that lock together quite tightly. Not exactly together, but reasonably close together. So that's how that animal lived, on the bottom of the sea. And it would open and close. And these can grow to huge sizes. I mean, there's always stories about people putting their feet in these and getting trapped. But I don't know whether that actually happened. But certainly they get very large, and you can get very big ones of these. And they're quite interesting. And I'm not sure, again, what kind of creature it is. But I've got one or two of them. Incidentally, I've got another of those conch shells, which is many, many years old. My father actually collected this from somewhere, and we use it as a garden ornament. So this one is really old, and it has got a hole in the end here, but not perhaps in the right place. So it does make a bit of a noise, woo, when you blow through there. So it would act as a trumpet. Now again, my father painted this with, I don't know, he painted with silver paint or whatever paint he put on it, but I think this has been painted. But this used to be in my garden when I was a child, and I've still got it all these years later, and it's in my collection. Now some of these shells are quite elaborate. There's another one, which is quite an elaborate shell. It's quite a big one. It's very similar to the one I showed you that I cut in half, but they come to all sorts of sizes. And there's another one about the same size as that one that I cut, just to see the internal structure. And that's another one. Now, other things that they get in the sea, of course, are corals. And I've got quite a lot of corals here. Now, again, they don't like people taking these corals from the sea because, you know, they don't like... but this is a bleached coral, so maybe it died anyway. But maybe they take them from the sea and they bleach them, I don't know. But this is like a flat, spongy type coral, which would have lain on the sea bed and been very beautiful in its day when it was a coral in the sea. But now it's turned bleached white, and that's a coral that's come out of the sea. And you get other ones which are fan-shaped, which grew out of the sea like that. And again, it's very pretty. It's covered in little pimples and dimples. So this may have been a naturally dyed coral, I don't know, and it's been bleached. But I hope they didn't actually take the creature out of the sea. But some that were taken out of the sea I've got here, and this is a red coral. Now I know this came, a friend of mine brought this back from Egypt for me, and I don't know what they use it for in Egypt, but they may use it in some sort of medicine or other and different things. But that's a red coral. And again, it's very beautiful. It's very tubey. Now, sometimes it comes that coral is very hard and in a lump. And people are very clever, as I say, and they carve it. Now, this, I believe, is a lump of that red coral, which has been carved into a little cat or something. Looks like a little animal. But again, they don't like you using this and carving it. But in foreign countries, they do it all the time. So you may find that if you buy some, you can't break in through customs to get it home. They may take it off you because it is restricted, but they do sell these still. And sometimes when you go to antique markets, you can find some that are old, and I believe that that is a really old one. Now, of course, in the sea, I mean, I've got another coral here which I'll show you, which is another very beautiful coral, and I bought this one many years ago, and again it's been bleached, but it's a beautiful coral and very interesting. And very nice to collect if you're interested in this sort of thing that you find in the sea. Now, of course, you find fossils in the sea. And I've got an example. I think I've shown this on video before. But I've got an example here of a millions of year old shell, which has been buried in the sea. And you can see it's a chamber. It's actually called an orthoceras. And this is a fossilized one. So fossils are readily found of seashells in the sea. And of course, you find creatures. This is from China, I believe, and this is a fossilized fish that's actually been fossilized in the rock, and it's in sandstone. It would have laid down in a bed like that, and it's been covered over. But they split the beds open, and they find these fish inside. So that's a fossilized fish from millions of years ago. Now, other corals which you find, sometimes fossilized. I don't think these are actual fossils. But they're certainly very old corals. They may be fossilized, I'm not sure. But these are very old corals that I picked up again at market. And they have wonderful patterns. And you can buy fossils. I've cut fossils myself which have exactly the same patination inside the coral as there is on this. And so they show the pattern of the coral, and that's another type. This one looks like a honeycomb, and it's got all little honeycombs in it. But this one has got a similar shape, but it's got more tubey pipes in it. And that's another coral that grew up in the sea. And I've got several of those. There's another type, more dense, and a different one again. And I've got another one, again, many years old, this one. This was in a fish tank that my father had. And this is very similar to that one, but this has got green. It's got a little bit green from possibly being in water. And there's another one which has got coloration on it from being presumably buried in water for many years. So those are corals that have been in the sea. Now another thing you get from the sea, and you can pick up very readily at markets or selling, are sponges. Now sponges are things that live in the sea, and this is a sponge. And of course people use sponges today, natural sponges, for washing. But they're usually made of rubber these days, rubberized materials. But this is a natural sponge, and of course it's as light as a feather, and there's no hardness to it. It isn't made of calcium carbide, calcium, which the seashells are, and it's very light. Now occasionally at markets you pick these up, and that's where I managed to buy these from, and they're very light and very interesting sponges. And I've got one or two sponges here. This is another sponge, and it's got like funny little ears on it. You wouldn't be able to wash with this, but it's definitely a sponge, and it's a very interesting little shape to it. It's got leaves on it, like leaf petally things, and this would live in the sea and wave about and collect nutrients as it waved about. So that's a sponge, and sometimes they'd form really big columns like this. They're sort of a colony creature. They live in colonies in the sea. So you find sponges like that, and again, it's as light as a feather and all hollow, but they gather these for washing. You know, you can wash in purposes. But there's natural sponges. I like to see them in their natural state. So I bought that as a sponge, and I've got in this just happens to be in this box, another shell, which is very peculiar. And look at the spikes on that. I mean, you wouldn't want to mess with him in the sea, because he's really spiky. He must have been very tasty for things, so he's got a lot of armaments. It's a strange shell, and it's got a long pointy end. What that end was for, I've no idea. But it's absolutely covered in spikes. And it's a really interesting seashell, which is in this box here with my sponges. I just found it. But you can find all sorts of shells. And I've got some more in this box here. Now these are very thin. I don't know what they're called, these exactly, but these are a very thin shell, and a very strange creature must have lived in that, because this is paper thin, this shell, and it wouldn't last very long floating around in the sea. So I don't know where this one actually came from. I picked it up again at a market somewhere, along with a job lot of shells probably. So I'm not sure what kind of shell that is, but it's very delicate, and it would have broken very easily. And another thing you get in the sea, there's another shell that you might find. They actually use these in cafes sometimes and serve seafood on them. And I think these are called scallops. And scallop shells are very interesting. I've only got this one scallop shell, but they do come in twos. And sometimes they use them, as I say, to serve food. Now another thing you pick up on the beach is this thing in here, which is the body of a... I just can't bring to mind what exactly it is now. I can't remember. It's some sort of scallop shell. No, it's not called a scallop shell. I don't know whether it's in this book. I don't know whether I can find it, because it's not really termed as a shell. This is the actual backbone of this creature, and so it might actually not tell you what it is. And as usual, with getting old, you sometimes forget the name of it. But this is quite interesting, because it's hard chalky material, and it's quite useful, because if you cut it, and I've got a piece here which I've cut, and you can actually press the shape. I've pressed a key shape in there, and if you put the two halves together, this is unfortunately broken, you can push it together and you can actually pour metal into it and use it as a mold for molding. I put a key in there, and years ago they used to forge keys to get out of prison or somewhere. If they could get hold to the key and make an impression in this scallop shell. It's not called a scallop. What is it called? I can't just think what this thing is called, but you see them very often on the beach lying about, and you can collect them, and they're quite useful. Birds chew them in they use them in bird cages as well for the beaks, so the birds, caged birds, can bite on it, and they can chew on it a little bit. And I've actually pressed the key in there as well, so I used it to press the key out, and then you can pour metal in to make a mold using this shellfish, which for the life of me I can't remember. What I should do is find out what it is and write it down, so that when I come to tell you about it, I can remember what it's called. But it's a very well-known shell, and they find them on the beach, but I can't at this moment to remember what it is. I'm sorry about that, but that's the way it goes. Sometimes Grandad makes mistakes, and he can't remember what the actual thing is called. And I really do need my notes or the book, so that I can find out exactly what that shell, that body of that, I don't know, it's not a crayfish. What on earth is it called? Oh dear, can't remember. That's awful. Anyway, that's all I've got to show you today, and it's gone on 21 minutes for this video, so it's gone on quite long enough. So you'll have to look up what that shell's called yourself. And that's a little look at some of the shells I've collected over the years, and corals, and sponges, which I hope has been of interest to you. And as I say, if you like my videos, don't forget to put a like up and subscribe to my videos, and tell your friends, share it on YouTube or whatever, Facebook, and hopefully I'll get a few more followers. And don't forget, put a like if you think this video was good. But I did make a mess of it at the end when I couldn't remember what that shell's called, but I'm sure you'll find out. Anyway, this is Grandad signing off as usual and saying until I meet again, bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.